The story of Lewis Carroll's worrying relationship with the young girl behind Alice in Wonderland. Who in the world am I? Asks Alice at one point in the classic children's book, Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. Ah, that's the great puzzle. In fact, it has long been supposed that the book's fictional protagonist was based on a real-life 11-year-old girl called Alice Liddell. And the author, it seems, was disturbingly fixated on her. Written in 1865 by Charles Lutwidge Dodgson under the pseudonym of Lewis Carroll, the book tells the story of a young girl who falls down a rabbit hole. Transported to Wonderland, she meets a host of fantastical creatures, a Mad Hatter, a Cheshire Cat and a Queen of Hearts, to name but a few. However, in Wonderland, nothing is as ever as it seems. I have had some scores of child friends since your time, Dodgson wrote to Liddell in later life, but they have been quite a different thing. In fact, according to the allegations of several researchers, Dodgson's relationship with Liddell may not have been an innocent friendship at all, but something altogether darker. Born in 1832 in the village of Daresbury in northwest England, Dodgson was the eldest son of a staunchly conservative Anglican cleric. He was a precocious child. When he wasn't entertaining his 10 siblings with stories and games, he worked through advanced reading lists assigned by his father. At the age of 7, he read The Pilgrim's Progress by John Bunyan, one of the most important works of Christian literature. In 1850, at the age of 18, Dodgson became an academic at the College of Christ Church at Oxford University. In his Reminiscences of Oxford, 1900, the Reverend W. Tuckwell described him as austere, shy, precise, absorbed in mathematical reverie, watchfully tenacious of his dignity, stiffly conservative in political, theological, social theory, his life mapped out in squares like Alice's landscape. Somewhat brilliant, Dodgson was a professional mathematician, logician, author, and poet. He was also a prolific photographer. However, he was not without defects either. After a childhood fever, he was deaf in one ear. Furthermore, a bout of whooping cough left his chest chronically compromised. And, like most of his siblings, he suffered from a lifelong stammer. In 1855, Henry Liddell arrived in Oxford with his family. He had been appointed Dean of Christ Church. Dodgson struck up a friendship with Liddell and his wife Lorena and became a kind of uncle to their children, entertaining them and taking them on outings. Bachelors in Victorian England often assumed such a role. On July 4, 1862, Dodgson took Liddell's 3 daughters, 13-year-old Lorena, 8-year-old Edith, and 10-year-old Alice, on a boating trip on the Thames. As Reverend Robinson Duckworth rode the party from Oxford to Godstow, Dodgson entertained them with a fantastical story about a little girl called Alice. That story eventually became Lewis Carroll's Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. However, in 1863, Dodgson and the Liddells appeared to have a serious disagreement. They stopped speaking for several months. Eventually they mended their friendship, but Dodgson never again socialized with their daughters. Meanwhile, the reason for their falling out is not known for certain, but at least one author has presented a shocking hypothesis. According to Lewis Carroll biographer Morton N. Cohen, Dodgson may have alienated himself from the family by asking to marry 11-year-old Alice. Somewhat suspiciously, a crucial page was found to have been torn from his journal. Its date was June 27, 1863, the time of the rift between Dodgson and the Liddells. That Dodgson took an unusual interest in young girls is apparent from his correspondence to a 10-year-old girl who once sent him a lock of hair. "Extra thanks and kisses for the lock of hair," he wrote. "I have kissed it several times, for want of having you to kiss, you know, even hair is better than nothing." Meanwhile, the most damning evidence of Dodgson's alleged deviancy are his own photographs. More than half his surviving collection, in fact, depict nude or semi-nude girls. "I confess I do not admire naked boys in pictures," he once wrote to artist Gertrude Thompson. "They always seem to need clothes, whereas one hardly sees why the lovely forms of girls should ever be covered up." Not every researcher has arrived at the same damning conclusions, however. For example, in 1996, Caroline Leach found a document in the Dodgson family archive that appeared to summarize the contents of the missing journal page. If accurate, the document appeared to describe certain local gossip relayed to Dodgson by Lorena Liddell. But it did not mention Alice. Moreover, Leach also highlighted numerous journal entries and letters that proved Dodgson's keen interest in adult women. In fact, many of his so-called child friends were actually in their late teens and 20s. She called the oft-cited representation of Dodgson as a repressed pedophile the Carroll myth. Indeed, according to Dodgson's staunchest defenders, his love of preteen female nudes was entirely innocent, when seen in its proper historical context. In the 19th century, nude children were frequently admired as symbolic representations of purity and innocence. In fact, nude children often featured on postcards and birthday cards. Thus Dodgson's interest in them was purely aesthetic. Meanwhile, between these two contrasting views of Dodgson lies a third analysis. Some researchers believe that he did experience a perverse attraction to children, but never acted on it. Instead, he sublimated his urges through creative and academic work. Indeed, Cohen analyzed Dodgson's journals to find a temporal correlation between his unholy thoughts, which torture with their hateful presence, his insomnia and his meetings with Alice Liddell. To me, there is a nobility in a self-restraint so forceful that it spews out stuttering tortoises and talking chess pieces rather than focus on the matter at hand, wrote novelist Katie Royf in an article for The Guardian newspaper in October 2001. There is something touching about a man who fights the hardest fight in the world, his own desire. Royf continues, you can feel the loneliness on the page. You can feel the longing in the photographs. You can witness the self-contempt in his diaries. How can one not feel sympathy for a man who writes in his diary, I pray to God to give me a new heart, but is stuck, in spite of his astonishing powers of invention, his brilliance, his immortal wit, with the one he has. In 1870, Dodgson photographed Liddell for the last time. She was 18 years old, and she appeared to be bored. Before she eventually married and bore 3 sons, rumor has it that Liddell had a fling with Queen Victoria's son, Prince Leopold. There may be some truth in the claim. He went on to name a daughter Alice. She named her second son Leopold. Dodgson himself died of pneumonia in 1898 in the town of Guildford in England. He was 65 years old. Despite spelling out Liddell's full name in an acrostic poem at the end of Through the Looking Glass, he always denied that his Alice was based on her. Today, meanwhile, his reputation remains a point of unresolved scholarly debate.